The blood on Ezra Blackwood's hands kept him isolated from Redemption Creek's persistent women, a self-imposed punishment he embraced until she appeared in the dusty street and shattered his resolve with a single glance. Her presence struck him like lightning, awakening emotions he had buried alongside his family's graves in Colorado. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The town of Redemption Creek knew very little about Ezra Blackwood beyond the essentials. He was the most skilled horseman west of the Mississippi, could outshoot any man foolish enough to challenge him, and hadn't looked twice at a woman since arriving 3 years ago. Some said it was grief that kept him distant, a lost love perhaps, or family tragedy. Others whispered he was running from something darker, a violent past that followed him like a shadow. But most folks in Redemption Creek had learned to mind their business when it came to Ezra Blackwood. The man had a way of silencing questions with nothing more than a steely glance from beneath the brim of his weathered hat. The Painted Stallion Saloon fell silent when Ezra pushed through the swinging doors that Tuesday afternoon. He moved with the easy confidence of a mountain lion, dark eyes scanning the room once before heading to the bar. His tall frame was clothed in a burgundy shirt beneath a dark vest with a gun belt worn smooth from years of use resting against his hip. "Whiskey," he said to Hank, the barkeep. The single word held no particular malice, but something in its delivery discouraged further conversation. "Coming right up, Mr. Blackwood." Hank slid the glass across the polished wood, careful not to spill a drop. From the corner table, Widow Patterson watched Ezra with unmasked interest. At 32, she'd been making her intentions known to the handsome cowboy for nearly a year, with nothing to show for her efforts but wounded pride. Still, she smoothed her skirts and prepared to make another attempt. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blackwood," she said, approaching with a practiced smile. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Ezra's eyes barely flickered in her direction. "Ma'am," he acknowledged with a slight nod before returning his attention to his drink. Not easily deterred, she continued, "I've just made a fresh apple pie. Too much for just me. I thought perhaps you might—" "Thank you, but I've got work waiting." He placed a coin on the counter, drained his glass, and stepped away from the bar. The widow's smile faltered only slightly. "Another time, then." Ezra offered no response as he moved toward the door. He heard the whispers that followed him, the widow's embarrassed laugh, the sympathetic clucking of her friends, the inevitable comments about his cold heart. None of it penetrated the careful walls he'd built around himself. Outside, Redemption Creek bustled with midday activity. The mercantile was doing steady business. The blacksmith's hammer rang out from his shop, and children darted between wagons in some game of their own invention. Ezra kept to the boardwalk, his long strides carrying him toward the livery where his horse waited. "Mr. Blackwood," Sheriff Miller called from across the street. "Got a minute?" Ezra paused, waiting as the lawman crossed to join him. "Problem?" "No problem," Miller assured him. "Just thought you should know we've got some newcomers. Family named Morales, setting up the old Thatcher place. Might be looking for ranch hands soon. I've got steady work at the Rocking M." Sure, the sheriff nodded. "Just passing along information. They arrived yesterday. Father, mother, and daughter came from Santa Fe. Father's a doctor, I hear." Ezra offered a non-committal grunt. New folks were always arriving in Redemption Creek, drawn by rumors of fertile land and opportunity. Most didn't last through their first winter. "Anyway," Miller continued, undeterred by Ezra's lack of interest, "thought you might want to introduce yourself, being neighbors and all. Their land borders yours to the east." This got Ezra's attention. "The Thatcher place borders my property?" "Just at the north corner where the creek bends. Probably won't see much of each other, but still, neighborly to say hello." Ezra considered this information. He valued his solitude, had purchased his land specifically for its isolation. The thought of neighbors, particularly ones who might need help settling in, was unwelcome. "I'll keep it in mind," he said finally, a dismissal the sheriff recognized from years of similar conversations. Miller tipped his hat. "Good day then, Mr. Blackwood." Ezra continued toward the livery, his mood darkening. New neighbors meant new complications. Potential disputes over water rights, stray cattle, hunting grounds. It meant noise where there had been blessed silence. It meant people, with their endless questions and expectations. At the livery, he found his black stallion, Demon, already saddled. The boy who worked there, Tommy Fletcher, had learned Ezra's habits well enough to anticipate his needs. "Afternoon, Mr. Blackwood," Tommy said, handing over the reins. "Got him ready when I saw you heading to the saloon." Ezra nodded his thanks, pressing a coin into the boy's palm. He mounted in one fluid motion, settling into the saddle with the comfort of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. As he turned Demon toward the road that would take him home, a commotion near the general store caught his attention. A wagon had arrived, loaded with crates and trunks. A man was directing several helpers in unloading, while a woman supervised the careful handling of what appeared to be medical equipment. The Morales family, Ezra guessed. The new neighbors. He should ride on, forget he'd seen them. Their problems were not his concern. But then she stepped down from the wagon. Time seemed to slow as Ezra watched her. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that caught the afternoon sunlight, her dark curls falling loose around shoulders that held themselves with unmistakable dignity. Unlike the women of Redemption Creek, who draped themselves in whatever Eastern fashions they could afford, she wore no elaborate bustle or excessive ornamentation. Her beauty needed no enhancement. She turned, scanning the street as if taking its measure, and Ezra found himself unable to look away. There was something in her face, intelligence certainly, but also a quiet strength that seemed at odds with her delicate features. When her gaze eventually found his, he felt an unexpected jolt, as if he'd touched a lightning rod during a storm. For the first time in years, Ezra Blackwood forgot himself, forgot to maintain his careful distance, forgot to look away before his interest became obvious, forgot even to breathe. She didn't smile or wave or give any indication that she'd noticed his attention. Instead, she regarded him with the same level assessment she'd given the rest of the town, neither inviting nor discouraging his gaze. Then, with deliberate grace, she turned back to her family and continued directing the unloading of their possessions. The spell broken, Ezra became aware of his surroundings again, of Tommy watching him with undisguised curiosity, of Widow Patterson observing from the boardwalk, her expression a mixture of surprise and resentment, of his own heart beating with an urgency he hadn't felt in years. Without another glance toward the Morales family, Ezra nudged Demon forward, eager to return to the solitude of his ranch. As he rode out of town, he told himself that his reaction meant nothing, that he was merely startled by newcomers in their small community, that by tomorrow he would have forgotten the woman in the cream dress and the inexplicable way she had broken through his carefully constructed indifference. He was lying to himself, and somewhere deep inside, Ezra Blackwood knew it. Elena Morales had known exactly what to expect from Redemption Creek. Another dusty frontier town full of hard men and harder women, suspicious of outsiders, particularly those with Spanish surnames. Her father's optimism about their new beginning had done little to soften her skepticism. At 26, Elena had seen enough of the world to understand that people rarely changed, regardless of geography. "What do you think of our new home, Hija?" Dr. Santiago Morales asked as they finished unloading their wagon. Elena surveyed the weathered buildings lining the main street, her expression carefully neutral. "It's quaint." Her father laughed, the sound warm despite his exhaustion. "You were expecting Paris, perhaps, or New York?" "I was expecting exactly this," she replied, helping him lift a crate of medical supplies. though I didn't anticipate quite so many curious stares. Indeed, the townsfolk made little effort to disguise their interest in the newcomers. Women paused their shopping to whisper behind gloved hands. Men lounged against storefronts, watching with undisguised assessment. Only the children showed honest curiosity, pointing and asking questions without pretense. "They'll grow accustomed to us," her mother, Isabella, assured her. "Your father's skills will soon make him indispensable." Elena nodded, though she remained unconvinced. In Santa Fe, despite 3 generations of their family serving as respected physicians, they had still been treated as outsiders by many. Her father's decision to move north had come after one too many wealthy patients had sought treatment, then refused payment with impunity. As she helped organize their belongings, Elena felt the weight of a particular gaze upon her. Unlike the curious townspeople, this observer watched with an intensity that sent an unexpected warmth up her spine. She turned, scanning the street until she found its source. The man sat atop a magnificent black stallion, his stillness setting him apart from the bustling activity around him. Even from a distance, she could sense something dangerous about him, not in a way that made her fear for her safety, but that suggested hidden depths and barely contained power. His dark clothing contrasted with the dusty surroundings, giving him an appearance of someone apart from this world rather than merely passing through it. For a moment their eyes met, and Elena felt something shift inside her, like the ground trembling before an earthquake. Then he was gone, riding out of town as if pursued by demons. "Who was that man?" she asked Tommy Fletcher, who had introduced himself earlier while helping unload their wagon. The boy followed her gaze. "That's Mr. Blackwood. Ezra Blackwood. Owns the big ranch northeast of town. He seems unsociable." Tommy shrugged. "He keeps to himself mostly. Does his business and leaves. Best horseman I ever seen, though. And fair, too. Pays well for work done right." "Is he married?" The question slipped out before Elena could stop herself. "No, ma'am," Tommy replied with the frankness of youth. "All the ladies in town have tried their luck, but Mr. Blackwood don't pay them any mind. Widow Patterson's been the most determined, bakes him pies every Sunday, but he barely notices." Elena found this information more interesting than she cared to admit. Perhaps he prefers solitude. "My pa says he's running from something. Says a man don't live alone like that unless he's hiding or hurting." "Your father sounds insightful," Elena said, turning back to her work. "Some wounds take longer to heal than others." Later that evening, as Elena helped her parents settle into the doctor's residence attached to what would become her father's practice, Sheriff Miller paid them a visit. "Welcome to Redemption Creek," he said, removing his hat as he entered. "Thought I'd check if you folks are getting settled all right." "Very kind of you, Sheriff," Dr. Morales replied. "We've received a warm welcome. Glad to hear it. Town's been without a proper doctor since old Doc Thatcher passed last winter. People are relieved to have medical care again." The sheriff accepted the coffee Isabella offered. "Any questions about the town or surroundings, I'm happy to help." Elna spoke up. "I understand our property borders Mr. Blackwood's ranch." Miller's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's right, miss, just along the creek bend. Met him already, have you?" "Not formally," she said. "I noticed him in town today. Ezra keeps to himself, but he's a good man to have as a neighbor. Fair, honest, and handy in a crisis. Saved 3 children from a flash flood last spring. Pulled them from the creek with that horse of his when no one else could get close." Elena absorbed this information, adding it to the sparse portrait she was forming of the mysterious rancher. "Does he have family?" "None that anyone knows of," Miller replied. "Been here 3 years now. Bought the old Hammond place when no one else would touch it. Turned it into one of the finest horse ranches in the territory." He hesitated, then added, "There's talk about his past, of course. Always is when a man keeps his own counsel. But that's all it is. Talk." People often invent stories when truth is unavailable, Elena observed. Wise words, Miss Morales. Miller finished his coffee. Well, I should be going, Doctor. The town council would like to officially welcome you tomorrow evening if you're amenable. We'd be honored, Santiago replied. After the sheriff left, Isabella gave her daughter a knowing look. You seemed quite interested in our neighbor, Elena. Simple curiosity, Mama. If our lands border his, it's prudent to know something about him. Of course, her mother replied, not bothering to hide her smile. Purely practical. The next morning, Elena rose early. Sleep had been elusive, filled with dreams of dark eyes watching her from beneath the brim of a weathered hat. Needing air and solitude, she decided to explore their new property while her parents slept. The land around the Thatcher place was beautiful in the dawn light, rolling hills covered in prairie grass with stands of cottonwood trees marking the creek that served as their property line. Helena followed a faint path toward the sound of running water, breathing deeply of the cool morning air. The creek was wider than she had expected, its clear waters rushing over smooth stones. She followed its course, enjoying the solitude until she rounded a bend and stopped abruptly. On the opposite bank stood Ezra Blackwood. He had been filling a canteen, but froze at the sight of her. Without his hat, his features were more visible. Strong jaw darkened with stubble, straight nose and eyes that seemed to hold both wariness and wilderness. His hair, dark as a raven's wing, fell across his forehead in a way that made Elena's fingers inexplicably itch to brush it back. For several heartbeats, neither spoke. The only sound was the creek flowing between them, a physical boundary that seemed to represent something deeper. Finally, Elena found her voice. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood. I believe we're neighbors." His expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or resignation. "Miss Morales," he replied, his voice a low rumble that seemed to match the creek's rhythm. "Welcome to Redemption Creek." The words were polite, expected even, but delivered with a reluctance that suggested speaking them had cost him considerable effort. He replaced the cap on his canteen and turned to leave. "Mr. Blackwood," Elena called after him, surprising herself with her boldness. "I hope we'll meet again under more formal circumstances." He paused, half turning toward her. For a moment she thought he might respond, might offer some word that would open a door between them. Instead, he gave a slight nod, mounted his waiting horse and rode away, leaving Elena to wonder what demons drove a man to such determined solitude, and why she felt so inexplicably drawn to discover them. The town council's reception for Dr. Morales and his family was held at Mayor Caldwell's home, a two-story structure that stood as Redemption Creek's most impressive residence. Nearly everyone of consequence had gathered to welcome the newcomers, their curiosity barely disguised his hospitality. Elena wore her best dress for the occasion, a simple but elegant ivory gown with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Her mother had insisted on arranging her hair in an elaborate style. Though Elena had refused the rouge and powder Isabella offered, she had no interest in making herself more appealing to the town's eligible bachelors, several of whom had already made their interest known during their first day of settling in. "You look beautiful, mi tesoro," her father said as they approached the mayor's home. "Try to enjoy yourself tonight. These people will soon be our friends and patients." Elena doubted this optimistic assessment, but nodded nonetheless. "I'll be on my best behavior, Papa." Inside, the reception was already underway. The mayor's wife, a plump woman with sharp eyes, immediately descended upon them. "Dr. Morales, Mrs. Morales, Miss Morales, we're so delighted you've joined our community," she gushed, guiding them through the crowded parlor. "Let me introduce you to everyone." What followed was a parade of names and faces Elena knew she would struggle to remember. The banker and his wife, the school teacher, the mercantile owner, various ranchers and their families. Each greeting followed a predictable pattern: polite words to her father, curious assessment of her mother, and undisguised evaluation of herself. The younger men were particularly transparent, their gazes lingering in ways that made Elena straighten her spine and cool her expression. "Don't frighten them all away," her mother whispered after the third potential suitor had retreated under Elena's withering glance. "At least give them a chance to reveal their character before dismissing them." "Their character is perfectly evident," Elena replied quietly. "They see a woman to be claimed, not a person to be known." Her attention was drawn to the doorway, where Sheriff Miller had just entered with a man Elena recognized as the town's newspaper editor. The sheriff caught her eye and nodded in greeting before scanning the room as if looking for someone. "Is Mr. Blackwood expected this evening?" she asked Mrs. Caldwell, who had returned with refreshments. The woman's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Ezra Blackwood? Heavens, no. He never attends social gatherings. I don't believe he's set foot in this house in the 3 years he's lived here." She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "They say he was engaged once, back east. The lady died tragically. Consumption, perhaps, or childbirth. He hasn't looked at another woman since. Or perhaps he simply values his privacy," Elena suggested, uncomfortable with such speculation. "Well, yes, that too," Mrs. Caldwell conceded, slightly deflated by Elena's lack of enthusiasm for gossip. "Though you'd be wasting your time there, my dear. Many have tried to draw him out. All have failed. I assure you I have no such intentions," Elena said firmly. "I merely asked out of neighborly interest." The evening progressed predictably. Her father charmed everyone with his medical knowledge and warm personality. Her mother made allies among the town's matrons with her gracious manners and subtle compliments. Elena endured 3 offers to dance, which she declined, 2 thinly veiled marriage proposals, which she pretended not to understand, and countless questions about her experience living among the Mexicans in Santa Fe, which she answered with increasingly strained patience. Just as she was contemplating an early departure, Sheriff Miller approached. "Miss Morales, I wonder if I might have a word." Relieved for the interruption, Elena followed him to a quieter corner of the room. "Is something wrong, Sheriff?" "Not at all. I was just speaking with Ezra Blackwood earlier today." Elena's heart inexplicably quickened. "Oh? Yes. He mentioned your encounter by the creek this morning." "Did he?" She struggled to keep her tone neutral. "He asked me to convey a message." The sheriff seemed slightly uncomfortable. "He said there's a stretch of the creek on your property, just beyond the large cottonwood, that produces the best trout in the county. Said you might enjoy fishing there if you're so inclined." Elena blinked in surprise. This was hardly the message she had expected. "He said this unprompted?" Miller nodded. "Strangest thing. Ezra rarely offers information without being asked directly. Never known him to take an interest in newcomers before." A warm sensation spread through Elena's chest. "Please thank Mr. Blackwood for the recommendation. I am indeed fond of fishing. There's more." Miller lowered his voice. "He also wanted you to know that the creek floods easily after heavy rain. Said you should watch for rising water and keep to higher ground if the sky darkens toward the mountains." The warning was practical, neighborly even, but Elena sensed something more in it, concern perhaps, or an acknowledgement of her presence in his carefully ordered world. "That's very considerate of him. Like I said, he's a good neighbor." Miller looked as if he wanted to say more, but thought better of it. "Enjoy your evening, Miss Morales." After the sheriff moved away, Elena found herself inexplicably drawn to the window. Outside, the night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. Somewhere beyond the town's borders, beyond the lamplit windows and piano music, Ezra Blackwood was presumably at his ranch, alone with whatever memories or secrets kept him isolated from the world she was currently enduring. She wondered what he would make of this gathering. The careful social maneuvers, the matchmaking mothers, the men evaluating potential wives based on dowry and appearance. Somehow she couldn't imagine him participating in such rituals, even before whatever tragedy had driven him to solitude. Making an escape plan? Her father's voice interrupted her thoughts as he joined her at the window. Elena smiled. Is it that obvious? Only to me. He patted her hand affectionately. You've never been one for these affairs. How much longer must we stay? Your mother is enjoying herself. Another hour, perhaps. He studied her face. The sheriff mentioned you'd met our neighbor, Mr. Blackwood. Briefly, she replied, by the creek this morning. And what did you make of him? Elena considered the question carefully. He seems complex. Ah, her father's eyes twinkled with understanding. Complex is good. Simple men are rarely interesting. Papa, don't start matchmaking. I have no romantic interest in Mr. Blackwood. Did I suggest otherwise? Santiago smiled innocently. Though I notice you immediately assumed I was speaking of romance rather than neighborly relations. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. Because I know how your mind works. As I know yours, Mihija. His expression grew more serious. Just be careful. Men who isolate themselves usually have good reasons. I have no intentions regarding Mr. Blackwood, she insisted. Her father merely nodded, though his eyes remained knowing. Of course. Now shall we rescue your mother from Mrs. Henderson? She's been trapped in conversation about preserves for the past 20 minutes. The next morning, Elena rose before dawn. The reception had dragged on well past her father's promised hour, and she had fallen into bed exhausted from maintaining her polite facade. But sleep had been fitful, her dreams once again haunted by dark eyes and unspoken words. Without allowing herself to examine her motivations too closely, she dressed in a simple skirt and blouse, packed a small basket with bread and cheese, and took her father's fishing pole from where it leaned against the porch. The morning air was cool against her skin as she followed the now familiar path to the creek, her steps quickening as she approached the water. The large cottonwood was easy to find, a giant sentinel standing guard over a gentle bend in the creek where the water pooled deeper and darker than elsewhere. Elena set down her basket and prepared the fishing line, wondering if Ezra Blackwood would appear or if his message had been merely a neighborly courtesy with no deeper meaning. As the sun crested the eastern hills, casting golden light across the rippling water, she realized she was holding her breath, listening for hoofbeats that did not come. Elena had been fishing for nearly an hour, the morning sun climbing higher in the sky when she sensed rather than heard someone approaching. She didn't turn immediately, maintaining her focus on the rippling water where her line disappeared beneath the surface. The trout are biting well today, she said, still not looking back. A moment of silence followed. Then Ezra Blackwood's deep voice replied, "They favor the morning hours." Only then did she turn to face him. He sat atop his black stallion, watching her with that same unreadable expression she had glimpsed at their first meeting. Today he wore a dark blue shirt beneath his vest, dust from the trail lightening his otherwise dark appearance. "Thank you for the recommendation," Elena said, gesturing toward the fishing pole, "and for the warning about the floods." He nodded once, his eyes moving from her to the creek and back again. "Creek looks peaceful now, but it can rise 6 feet in less than an hour when storms hit the mountains. Have you lived here long enough to witness such flooding?" 3 years. He shifted slightly in his saddle. "Lost half my first herd to a flash flood. Didn't know the land well enough then." This small offering of personal information felt significant. Elena recognized it as a tentative bridge between them, one she should cross carefully. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said. "That must have been devastating." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Made me learn the land better. Won't happen again." Elena reeled in her line, which had remained untouched during their exchange. As she reset her bait, she felt his eyes on her hands, watching her practiced movements. "You've fished before," he observed, "since childhood." "My father believed daughters should learn practical skills alongside sons." She cast her line back into the water with a graceful arc. "Though I never had brothers to compete with." Ezra remained silent, but she could feel his continued scrutiny. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but intense, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces kept changing shape. "Would you care to join me?" she asked, surprising herself with the invitation. "There's bread and cheese in my basket." His refusal seemed inevitable, yet he hesitated, conflict evident in his expression. "I should check my northern fence line." "Of course." Elena turned her attention back to the water, refusing to show disappointment. "Another time, perhaps." Instead of riding away immediately as she expected, Ezra dismounted, tethering his horse to a nearby sapling. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, his steps nearly silent on the creek bank as he approached. "I can spare a few minutes," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. Elena smiled, not looking directly at him lest she frighten him away like a wary animal. "The view is certainly worth a moment's appreciation." They stood in silence, watching the water flow past. It was a comfortable quiet, without the awkward pressure to fill it with unnecessary words. Elena sensed that Ezra was unaccustomed to companionship, that even this brief interaction represented a significant departure from his routine. "Your family is settling in well?" he finally asked. "Yes. My father has already seen his first patients. Word travels quickly about a new doctor. Good doctors hard to find out here. People will come from miles around. He hopes to establish a proper practice. In Santa Fe, he often treated patients who couldn't pay." She paused, wondering how much to reveal. It wasn't always appreciated by those who believed medicine should be reserved for those who could afford it. Ezra made a non-committal sound. "Out here, a man who can set bones and stop bleeding is welcome regardless of his background." "And a woman?" Elena asked, unable to help herself. "Is she also judged by her usefulness rather than her background?" His eyes met hers, something flickering in their depths. "A woman is often judged unfairly, regardless of where she stands." The insight surprised her. "You're more perceptive than most men, Mr. Blackwood." "Ezra," he said quietly. "Ezra," she repeated, liking the feel of his name on her tongue. "I'm Elena." He nodded, as if committing this exchange to memory. Then, with evident reluctance, he glanced at the sun's position. "I should go." "The fence line won't check itself," she agreed with a small smile. As he turned to leave, Elena found herself speaking again. "I'll be here again tomorrow morning. The trout are worth a second visit." Ezra paused, his back to her. For a long moment he said nothing, and Elena feared she had overstepped. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded before mounting his horse and riding away. She watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then returned her attention to fishing with renewed concentration, refusing to examine too closely the warmth spreading through her chest or the smile that refused to leave her lips. When Elena returned home with 4 good-sized trout, her mother was waiting on the porch. "Productive morning," Isabella observed, eyeing the fish. "The creek is generous." "Mr. Blackwood suggested a good spot," Elena replied, keeping her tone casual as she cleaned her catch at the outdoor pump. "Did he now?" Her mother's voice held a note of interest that Elena chose to ignore. "And did you see our mysterious neighbor while you were there?" "Briefly. He was checking his property." Isabella studied her daughter's face, You seem different today. How so? More present, less restless. She helped Elena carry the cleaned fish inside. It reminds me of how you were before Thomas. The mention of her former fiancé sent a familiar pang through Elena's chest. Thomas has nothing to do with my mood. Of course not, her mother agreed too readily. Just an observation. Later that afternoon, while assisting her father in organizing his medical supplies, Elena finally asked the question that had been bothering her since arriving in Redemption Creek. "Papa, do you ever regret leaving Santa Fe?" Santiago looked up from the herbs he was categorizing. "Regret? No. I miss certain aspects. The cathedral bells, familiar faces, your aunt's cooking. But regret implies I made a wrong choice." "And you're certain you didn't?" He studied her face. "What troubles you, Elena? Is it the town? The people?" "No, it's not that." She arranged glass bottles on a shelf, considering her words carefully. "I've been thinking about choices, about how a single decision can alter one's entire path. Like your decision not to marry Thomas." Elena's hands stilled. "That wasn't really a choice, not after I discovered his true character. Yet many women would have proceeded with the marriage despite his indiscretions." Santiago's voice held no judgment. "You chose dignity over security. It was brave." "It didn't feel brave. It felt necessary." She resumed her work, not meeting her father's eyes. "I sometimes wonder if I'll ever trust my judgment again." "Is this about Mr. Blackwood?" Elena nearly dropped the bottle she was holding. "Why would you think that?" "Because I know you, Mejia. I've seen how you look when speaking of him. Cautious, intrigued, and afraid all at once. I barely know him. Yet you sense something in him that resonates with you." Santiago stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Trust your instincts, Elena. They've served you well so far." "Even with Thomas?" "Especially with Thomas. You recognize the truth when confronted with it, despite the pain it caused." Elena considered this. "Mr. Blackwood, Ezra, is nothing like Thomas. He's honest, I think. Painfully so. Then perhaps he's exactly what you need." Santiago returned to his herbs. "Just proceed with care. Even honest men can carry dangerous burdens." That night, as Elena prepared for bed, a soft knock came at her bedroom door. Her mother entered, carrying something wrapped in cloth. "I thought you might want this," Isabella said, placing the bundle on Elena's bed. Unwrapping it, Elena found her grandmother's fishing tackle, delicate handmade lures that had always proven irresistible to even the wariest fish. "For tomorrow morning," her mother explained with a knowing smile, "since you'll be fishing again." Elena felt herself blush. "Is it that obvious? Only to those who love you." Isabella kissed her daughter's forehead. "Sweet dreams, mi amor." As moonlight filtered through her window, Elena found herself wondering if Ezra Blackwood would indeed appear at the creek tomorrow, and what it might mean if he did. For 3 consecutive mornings, Elena and Ezra met by the creek. Each day he arrived on horseback, initially claiming some task that required his attention nearby. Each day he stayed a little longer, their conversations gradually extending beyond polite observations about weather and fishing. On the 4th day, he brought his own fishing pole. "My mother would be scandalized," Elena said with a smile as they sat side by side on the creek bank. "Unchaperoned meetings with a man I barely know." Ezra's expression remained serious. "Is it improper? I can leave." "I was joking, Ezra. I'm 26 years old, hardly a naive girl requiring protection from her reputation." She cast her line into the water. "Besides, I think we're beyond being strangers now." He considered this, his brow furrowed slightly. "What are we then?"
The question was startlingly direct, typical of his unvarnished manner. Elena appreciated how he never couched his words in social niceties or false pretenses. "Friends, I hope," she replied carefully, "or at least friendly neighbors." Something like disappointment flickered across his face, so briefly she might have imagined it. "Friends," he repeated, testing the word as if it were in a foreign language. "Don't you have friends in town?" "No." The simple answer held no self-pity, just statement of fact. Elena studied his profile as he concentrated on the water, noting the tension he carried in his shoulders, the watchful alertness that never seemed to leave him even in moments of apparent relaxation. "Why is that?" she asked gently. Ezra was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "People want things I can't give. Conversation, social calls, explanations. And I don't want these things." His eyes met hers, dark and serious. "You don't demand them. There's a difference." A fish tugged at Elena's line, interrupting the moment. She focused on reeling it in, a beautiful rainbow trout that gleamed in the morning sunlight. As she worked to unhook it, Ezra watched her hands with that same intense focus she had noticed before. "You have skilled hands," he observed. "Steady." "My father taught me. He said a doctor's daughter should understand precision and patience." She released the fish back into the creek. "What did your father teach you?" The question crossed some invisible boundary. Ezra's expression closed instantly, the openness of the previous moment vanishing like morning mist under a hot sun. "To survive," he said curtly, rising to his feet. "I should go." "Ezra, wait." Elena stood, reaching toward him but stopping short of actual contact. "I'm sorry if I overstepped." He paused, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. "You didn't know." "Know what?" For a moment she thought he might explain, might finally offer some insight into the mysteries that surrounded him. Instead, he merely shook his head. "Tomorrow, same time." Despite her frustration at the abrupt shift, Elena nodded. "I'll be here." As he rode away, she couldn't help feeling she'd glimpsed a door momentarily cracked open before being firmly shut again. Whatever wounds Ezra Blackwood carried, they were evidently still raw enough to dictate his every interaction. That afternoon, while helping at her father's clinic, Elena encountered Widow Patterson for the first time. The woman arrived complaining of headaches, though her true purpose became apparent when she began questioning Santiago about his daughter's activities. "I understand Miss Morales enjoys early morning fishing," the widow said with calculated casualness. "Such a solitary pastime for a young lady." Santiago, busy measuring powders for a headache remedy, merely smiled. "My daughter has always valued time for reflection." Indeed, though one hears she may not always be alone during these reflections. The widow's tone sharpened. "Mr. Blackwood has been seen riding in that direction most mornings." Elena, organizing supplies in the adjoining room, froze at the mention of Ezra's name. "Is that so?" her father replied, his tone revealing nothing. "Redemption Creek seems admirably attentive to its residents' movements." "We look after one another here, Doctor." The widow leaned forward. "I feel I should warn you. Ezra Blackwood is not a suitable companion for a respectable young woman. There are rumors about his past." "Rumors," Santiago repeated mildly, "are rarely reliable sources of information, Mrs. Patterson. Even when they concern a man who arrived in town with blood on his clothes and a gun that had recently been fired. A man who refuses to speak of where he came from or why he left." The widow's voice dropped to a dramatic whisper. "Some say he killed a man, perhaps several men, before coming here." Elena stepped into the doorway, unable to remain silent any longer. "And you've personally verified these claims, Mrs. Patterson?"
The older woman startled, clearly not having realized Elena could overhear. Well, that is to say, Sheriff Miller himself mentioned that Mr. Blackwood arrived looking travel-worn after a long journey, as many do in this territory. Elena finished for her. Or perhaps the sheriff shared his assessment that Mr. Blackwood is an honorable man who values his privacy. The widow's cheeks flushed with embarrassment or anger, possibly both. You're very quick to defend a man you barely know, Miss Morales, and you're very quick to malign one who cannot defend himself. Elena maintained a polite smile despite her simmering anger. I wonder why that might be. Santiago intervened smoothly, handing Mrs. Patterson her medicine. 2 pinches in hot water morning and evening should relieve your headaches, perhaps avoid situations that cause tension or distress. The implied rebuke was gentle but unmistakable. The widow accepted the packet with tight-lipped dignity and departed without further comment, though the look she gave Elena promised this matter was far from settled. That woman has pursued Ezra Blackwood for years, Elena fumed once the widow was gone. Now she spreads malicious rumors because he showed no interest in her pies and preserves. Perhaps, her father agreed, or perhaps she genuinely believes she's protecting you from danger. Do you believe those rumors about Ezra? Santiago considered the question. I believe every man carries parts of his past he'd rather not explain. Whether those parts include violence, he shrugged. That would depend on the man's character, which I cannot judge without knowing him. I know him, Elena said quietly. Do you? Do. Her father's eyes were kind but searching. Or do you know only what he's allowed you to see? The question lingered in Elena's mind that evening as she prepared for bed. Had she truly glimpsed the real Ezra Blackwood during their creekside meetings, or merely the parts of himself he was willing to reveal? His reaction to her innocent question about his father suggested depths of pain he kept carefully guarded. Yet she couldn't reconcile the wounded, solitary man she was coming to know with the violent figure of Widow Patterson's insinuations. There was unquestionably darkness in Ezra, but Elena sensed it was turned inward rather than outward, self-punishment rather than threats to others. As she drifted toward sleep, Elena found herself wondering what circumstances could drive a man to such isolation, and whether the comfort of human connection could ever be enough to draw him back from whatever precipice he stood upon. The next morning, heavy clouds hung over the mountains, promising rain by afternoon. Elena hesitated before taking her fishing gear, remembering Ezra's warning about flash floods. Deciding that the morning at least would be safe, she made her way to their usual meeting spot, eager despite herself to see if he would appear after yesterday's abrupt departure. Ezra was already at the creek when Elena arrived, not on horseback as usual, but standing near the water's edge, staring at the dark clouds gathering over the distant mountains. He turned at the sound of her approach, and something in his expression made her heart quicken. You shouldn't be here, he said without preamble. Storm's coming faster than expected. Elena glanced at the sky. It still looks hours away. An hour at most. Mountain storms move quickly. He gestured toward the creek. Water's already rising from rainfall upstream. Looking more carefully, Elena noticed the creek did indeed seem higher than previous days, its current stronger, edges encroaching on what had been dry bank. Then we should make the most of our hour, she replied, setting down her basket. I brought coffee this morning. Ezra hesitated, clearly torn between concern for safety and reluctance to cut short their time together. Finally, he nodded. Half an hour, then you head home before the rain starts. They sat on a fallen log slightly higher than their usual spot. The coffee poured into 2 tin cups Elena had brought. Steam rose between them in the cool morning air, carrying the rich aroma that somehow made the moment feel more intimate. I met Mrs. Patterson yesterday, Elena said after a comfortable silence. She came to my father's clinic. Ezra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Did she? She seems to have strong opinions about you. Most people do. She mentioned rumors. Elena watched his face carefully. About how you arrived in Redemption Creek. His eyes remained fixed on the water. People talk, especially when you don't give them the answers they want. Are the rumors true? Ezra's gaze finally met hers, searching, assessing. Which ones? That you arrived with blood on your clothes, that you'd recently fired your gun. A muscle twitched in his cheek. Yes. The simple admission hung between them, neither confirmation of guilt nor claim of innocence. Elena waited, giving him space to elaborate if he chose. Does that frighten you? He asked finally. Should it? Most would say yes. Elena considered this. I'm not most people. No, he agreed softly. You're not. The moment stretched between them, weighted with unspoken questions and possibilities. Elena sensed they were standing at a crossroads. Push too hard and he would retreat behind his walls, say nothing and remain forever in this limbo of half-truths and uncertainty. I believe a person's actions reveal more about their character than their past, she said carefully. You've shown me nothing but respect and kindness. Something shifted in Ezra's expression. A softening around the eyes, perhaps, or a lessening of the vigilant tension he always carried. My father died when I was 16, he said suddenly, shot by a man who wanted our land. My mother followed 6 months later. Pneumonia, they said. I think it was grief. The unexpected confidence left Elena momentarily speechless. This was the most personal information he had shared since they'd met. I'm sorry, she said simply, knowing platitudes would ring hollow. I killed the man who murdered my father. His voice was flat, emotionless, and his 2 brothers when they came looking for revenge. The confession should have shocked her, perhaps even frightened her. Instead, Elena felt an odd sense of clarity, as if puzzle pieces were finally falling into place. That's why you came here, to escape the consequences. Ezra shook his head. There were no legal consequences. It was self-defense, clear and witnessed. I came here because everywhere I looked, I saw their faces. The land, the house, everything was stained with blood and memories. And now I've built something new. Something that's mine alone. His eyes found hers again. Until recently. The implication sent warmth flooding through Elena's chest despite the cooling air. Before she could respond, a distant rumble of thunder drew their attention to the darkening sky. We need to go, Ezra said, rising to his feet. Rain's coming faster than I thought. They quickly gathered their things, the moment lost to more immediate concerns. As they reached the path that would take Elena home, Ezra caught her arm gently. Elena. Her name on his lips still felt new and significant. What I told you stays between us, she assured him. I understand the weight of trusting someone with your past. Relief crossed his features. Thank you. The first heavy raindrops began to fall as they parted ways, Elena hurrying toward home while Ezra headed for his ranch. The wind picked up, bending the prairie grass and whipping her skirts around her ankles as the storm descended in earnest. By the time she reached the house, Elena was soaked through, her hair plastered to her face and neck. Her mother met her at the door with a blanket and concerned reprimands. Where have you been? Your father and I were worried sick. I was fishing. The storm came faster than expected. Isabella's expression softened as she helped Elena remove her wet outer clothes. Your mysterious neighbor didn't warn you about the weather? He did, actually. That's why I returned when I did. Her mother studied her face with knowing eyes. Something's changed. Did he finally open up to you? Elena hesitated, unwilling to betray Ezra's confidence, yet unable to hide her emotional turmoil from her perceptive mother. We talked, she said simply. He's had a difficult life. Haven't we all? Isabella murmured. Go change before you catch your death. Your father's been called to the Wilson farm. Their oldest boy fell from the barn loft. The afternoon passed slowly as the storm intensified. Elena found herself repeatedly drawn to the windows, watching the rain lash against the glass and wondering if Ezra had reached home safely. The creek would be rising rapidly now, potentially threatening the lower portions of his property. When her father returned, drenched and exhausted but satisfied with the boy's prognosis, he brought disturbing news from town. Widow Patterson has been busy, he said grimly, as he accepted a cup of hot coffee from Isabella. She's telling anyone who'll listen that Ezra Blackwood has been compromising our daughter's virtue during these morning meetings. Elena felt her cheeks burn with indignation. That's absurd. We've done nothing improper. Of course not, Santiago agreed. But you know how quickly rumors spread in small towns. The widow seems determined to damage either his reputation or yours, possibly both. Why would she do this? Jealousy, Isabella suggested. From what I've heard, she's been pursuing Mr. Blackwood since he arrived. Well, she can't have him, Elena snapped, then immediately regretted her revealing outburst. Her parents exchanged meaningful glances. Elena, her father said gently, is there something you want to tell us about your relationship with Mr. Blackwood? There's no relationship, she insisted, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. We're friends. Barely that. Mihija, her mother said, taking her hand. We've seen how your face changes when you speak of him. There's no shame in developing feelings for a good man. Is he a good man, though? Elena whispered, voicing the doubt that had lingered despite her defense of him. He's killed people, Papa. Santiago's expression remained calm. Has he told you the circumstances? Self-defense, avenging his father's murder. Her father nodded slowly. Then he's done nothing any honorable man wouldn't do to protect his family and himself. Outside, the storm reached its peak, rain hammering against the roof like angry fists. Elena moved to the window again, peering into the gray curtain of water that obscured everything beyond their yard. I'm worried about him, she admitted quietly. His ranch is close to the creek. There's nothing you can do until the storm passes, her mother said reasonably. Mr. Blackwood has survived worse than rain, I imagine. Yet as evening fell and the storm showed no signs of abating, Elena's worry grew. The creek would surely be flooding by now, possibly threatening Ezra's home and livestock. The thought of him facing this danger alone, perhaps even at this moment fighting to save his horses from rising waters, was unbearable. Dawn broke with eerie stillness after the storm's fury. Elena stood on the porch surveying the damage, branches scattered across the yard, a chicken coop overturned, the path to town transformed into a muddy river. But it was the distant sound that truly concerned her, the roar of water where the usually gentle creek had become a raging torrent. I need to check on Ezra, she announced as her father joined her outside. Santiago frowned. The roads will be impassable, Elena. Even the most direct routes will be dangerous. I know the high path through the ridge. It should be above the flooding. Her father studied her face, recognizing the determination set in her jaw. At least wait until mid-morning when things have settled. And take my medical bag, there may be injuries. By 9 o'clock, Elena had saddled her mare and packed supplies, food, blankets, and her father's smaller medical kit. The sky remained overcast, but the rain had stopped, leaving behind a world transformed by water and mud. Be careful, Isabella cautioned, handing her a bundle of extra bandages. If the waters are too high, turn back immediately. I will, Elena promised, though they both knew her stubborn nature made such assurances questionable. The journey was arduous. Twice she had to backtrack when the path disappeared beneath rushing water. The mare picked her way carefully across debris-strewn ground, occasionally balking at particularly treacherous passages. In the distance, Elena could see the creek had overflowed its banks, spreading across the lower meadows in a vast brown lake. Her heart sank as she crested the final ridge overlooking Ezra's ranch. The main house stood on higher ground, but the stables and corrals were dangerously close to the floodwaters. Men on horseback, ranch hands she presumed, worked frantically to move livestock to safety, driving cattle toward the slopes away from the encroaching water. It took her several minutes to spot Ezra, knee-deep in muddy water near what remained of the fence line, working alongside his men to secure a barrier of sandbags. Even from this distance, she could see his exhaustion in the set of his shoulders and the labored way he moved. As she guided her mare down the slope, one of the ranch hands noticed her approach and alerted Ezra. He looked up, freezing momentarily when he recognized her, then waded out of the water and strode toward her with obvious concern. "What are you doing here?" he demanded as she dismounted. "It's not safe." "I was worried," she replied simply. "I brought medical supplies in case anyone was hurt." His expression softened slightly. "You shouldn't have risked the journey." "Yet here I am." Elena untied her medical bag. "Are there injuries?" Ezra hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "2 men with cuts from debris, nothing serious. Miguel twisted his ankle when a section of fence collapsed." "Let me help." He seemed about to refuse, then glanced back at his exhausted men and nodded. "Come to the house. We've moved the injured there." The ranch house was larger than Elena had expected, built of solid timber with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Inside, it was surprisingly comfortable, simple furnishings but of good quality, with bookshelves lining one wall and a massive stone fireplace dominating another. 3 injured men sat or lay in the main room. Elena moved among them efficiently, cleaning wounds, applying bandages, and fashioning a proper support for Miguel's ankle. Ezra watched her work with undisguised admiration. "You have your father's touch," he observed as she finished. "I've assisted him since I was a girl." She washed her hands in a basin. "Have you slept at all?" "No time. Creek started rising just after I left you yesterday." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it more disheveled than before. "Lost the lower pasture and part of the east corral. Could have been worse. You need rest. Later." He moved to the window, watching his men continuing their work. "Water's receding now, but slowly. Need to salvage what we can while there's daylight." Elena joined him at the window. "Then I'll help. You've done enough already. I'm stronger than I look, Ezra, and I'm here now. Use me." Something flickered in his eyes, respect perhaps, or a deeper emotion he wasn't ready to name. "All right, but stay close to the house. If I tell you to move to higher ground, you do it without question." They worked side by side for hours, moving supplies, treating minor injuries as they occurred, and distributing food among the exhausted ranch hands. Elena saw a different side of Ezra, a leader who commanded respect not through intimidation but through example, working harder than anyone else, ensuring his men ate and rested while neglecting his own needs. By late afternoon, the immediate crisis had passed. The creek, while still swollen, had retreated within its banks, leaving behind a swath of mud and debris. The cattle were secure on higher ground, and the remaining horses safe in the upper stable. Elena found Ezra on the porch, slumped in a chair, exhaustion finally claiming him. He startled awake when she touched his shoulder. "You need proper sleep," she said firmly. "A few hours at least." He shook his head. "Need to check the north pasture before dark." "Your foreman can do that. You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." Something in her tone, authority without condescension, seemed to reach him. He nodded slowly. A few hours. Then we need to discuss getting you home safely. I'm not leaving until morning, Elena stated, brooking no argument. The paths will be too dangerous in twilight. His eyes met hers, a mixture of concern and something warmer flickering in their depths. People will talk. People already talk. Mrs. Patterson has seen to that. Ezra's jaw tightened. I heard. I'm sorry you've been dragged into my problems. They're only problems if we allow them to be. Elena sat beside him, suddenly aware of their isolation. The ranch hands had retreated to the bunkhouse, leaving them alone in the gathering dusk. What people think matters far less to me than what is true. And what is true, Elena? His voice was low, almost a whisper. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. That I care for you, more than I should, perhaps, given how little time we've known each other. The words hung between them, impossible to retract. For a moment, Ezra remained utterly still, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Then, with aching slowness, he reached out to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I've spent 3 years avoiding anything that might make me vulnerable again, he said quietly. Then you appeared at the creek that morning, and everything changed. Elena leaned slightly into his touch. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know yet. His honesty, as always, was both frustrating and endearing, but I'm tired of fighting it. The kiss, when it came, was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. Elena answered by moving closer, her hand finding his shoulder as the contact deepened. It was neither the passionate embrace of youthful infatuation nor the careful formality of courtship, but something more honest than either, two wounded people offering comfort and possibility to each other. When they finally parted, Ezra's expression held wonder and trepidation in equal measure. I can't offer you what other men might. My life is complicated, my past. I'm not asking for promises, Elena interrupted gently. Just honesty. The rest we can figure out as we go. He nodded, seemingly at a loss for words. Exhaustion was rapidly overtaking him again, his shoulders sagging under its weight. Sleep now, she said, rising from her chair. I'll be here when you wake. As she helped him to his room, ensuring he removed his muddy boots before collapsing onto the bed, Elena wondered what morning would bring. She had crossed a line tonight, one that would forever alter her relationship with this complex, wounded man. Whether that change would bring healing or further heartbreak remained to be seen. Elena woke before dawn in the small guest room where she had eventually retired. For several moments she lay still, orienting herself to unfamiliar surroundings. The simple wooden furniture, the handmade quilt covering her, the faint scent of pine and leather that seemed to permeate the entire house. Memories of the previous evening flooded back. The kiss on the porch, the tenderness in Ezra's exhausted eyes, the unspoken possibilities that now stretched between them. Rising quietly, she moved to the window. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, revealing a landscape transformed by the flood but no longer threatened by it. In the distance, she could see ranch hands already at work, assessing damage and beginning repairs. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, intending to prepare breakfast before others stirred. To her surprise, Ezra was already there, stoking the fire in the cook stove. You should still be resting, she said, pausing in the doorway. He turned, and something in his expression, a cautious warmth, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before, made her heart quicken. Slept enough, he replied, though the shadows beneath his eyes suggested otherwise. Not used to sleeping past dawn. Elena moved into the kitchen, maintaining a careful distance between them. Last night's intimacy felt both immediate and fragile in the cold light of morning. About yesterday, she began hesitantly. Do you regret it? His directness was familiar, almost comforting in its consistency. No, she answered honestly. Do you? Instead of responding immediately, Ezra reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. The gesture was somehow more intimate than their kiss had been, deliberate, unhurried, a choice made in full awareness rather than emotional exhaustion. "Never," he said simply. They worked together preparing a simple breakfast, moving around each other with a new awareness, but also an unexpected comfort, as if they had been sharing this space for years rather than hours. Occasionally their hands would brush, or their eyes would meet, and the kitchen would seem suddenly smaller, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. As they set the table, Ezra finally addressed what they had both been avoiding. "People will talk when you return. Being here overnight." "Let them talk," Elena replied with more confidence than she felt. "We've done nothing wrong. Perception matters in small towns. So does truth." She placed the last plate on the table. "I won't pretend to be ashamed of helping a neighbor during an emergency." Ezra studied her face. "You're remarkable, you know that? For having basic decency. For facing the world on your terms, regardless of what others think." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "Most people bend themselves into shapes that please others. You remain stubbornly yourself." The compliment warmed her. "Perhaps that's why we understand each other." They might have said more, might have revisited the tenderness of the previous evening, but the arrival of the ranch foreman interrupted the moment. "Boss," Carlos said, nodding respectfully to Elena. "Sorry to intrude. Riders coming from town." Ezra's expression immediately shuddered. "How many?" "3. Sheriff Miller and Dr. Morales. Don't recognize the third." Relief crossed Ezra's features. "Your father must be worried about you." "I told him I'd be staying overnight," Elena said, frowning. "He wouldn't have come unless something happened in town." Ezra finished for her, his jaw tightening. "Let's go meet them." They walked out to the porch together, watching as the 3 riders approached through the muddy yard. Elena recognized her father immediately, but it took her a moment to identify the third rider. Widow Patterson, sitting primly on a borrowed mare, her expression a mixture of righteous indignation and poorly concealed triumph. "Trouble," Ezra muttered beside her. Sheriff Miller dismounted first, his face grave. "Morning, Ezra. Miss Morales." "Sheriff," Ezra acknowledged. "Doctor, Mrs. Patterson, what brings you out after the storm?" Before Miller could answer, the widow spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Indecency and scandal bring us here, Mr. Blackwood. This young woman's reputation is being destroyed by her association with you." Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks, not embarrassment but anger. "My reputation is my own concern, Mrs. Patterson." "Elena," her father cautioned quietly, dismounting and approaching the porch. "There have been developments in town." "What kind of developments?" she asked, noticing how Ezra had subtly positioned himself between her and the visitors, his posture protective without being possessive. Sheriff Miller removed his hat, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Patterson has made certain allegations. Claims she has evidence that Mr. Blackwood's past includes more than just self-defense." Ezra's expression remained impassive, though Elena felt him tense beside her. "What evidence?" "A letter," the widow said smugly, "from the marshal in Colorado Territory, describing how you gunned down not just the man who killed your father but his brothers as well, from behind while they were unarmed." Elena glanced at Ezra, searching his face for denial. Instead, she found a cold stillness that frightened her more than any display of anger would have. "Where did you get this letter?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "It arrived addressed to the sheriff's office months ago," Mrs. Patterson replied. "My late husband was deputy then. He preserved it." "You mean he stole official correspondence?" Sheriff Miller corrected, his disapproval evident. "I only learned of its existence yesterday when Mrs. Patterson brought it to me." Santiago approached the porch steps, his expression troubled. "Elena, I came to escort you home while this matter is clarified." "I'm not leaving," she said firmly, though uncertainty gnawed at her. She turned to Ezra. "Is it true?" For a long moment he was silent, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the yard. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "Not the way she tells it, but yes, I killed them all." The admission sent a chill through Elena, despite the morning sun that had begun to warm the porch. "They murdered my father for our water rights," Ezra continued, his words directed at Elena alone, as if the others had ceased to exist. "Shot him in the back while he was fixing a fence. When I tracked down the man who did it, his brothers ambushed me. I killed the first in self-defense, as witnesses testified." "And the others?" Elena asked quietly. "I hunted them for weeks. Found them drunk in a saloon in Pueblo." His eyes finally met hers, unflinching despite the pain evident in them. "They weren't armed when I confronted them, but they weren't innocent either." Widow Patterson made a sound of triumph. "You see? He admits to cold-blooded murder. And this is the man with whom our respectable doctor's daughter has been spending unchaperoned time." "I think," Santiago said carefully, "that there is more to this story than a single letter can convey." "The law sees it differently," the widow insisted. "Marshal Tate's letter is quite clear. He declined to pursue charges only because no witnesses would testify against Mr. Blackwood, not because he was innocent." Sheriff Miller looked uncomfortable. "I haven't decided how to proceed with this information, but given the circumstances, it seemed proper to inform Dr. Morales about his daughter's situation." Elena felt a surge of protective anger. "My situation is that I chose to help a neighbor during a flood and stayed when travel became dangerous. Nothing improper occurred." "Your overnight presence in a bachelor's home says otherwise," Mrs. Patterson countered. Elena stepped forward, her patience finally exhausted. "Your obsession with Mr. Blackwood's rejection of your advances says far more, Mrs. Patterson. This vendetta helps no one." The widow gasped, her hand flying to her throat in theatrical shock. "How dare you? Sheriff, did you hear that slander?" "I heard a great many things this morning," Miller replied evenly, none of them particularly helpful. Santiago moved to stand beside his daughter, his presence both supportive and cautioning. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion inside, away from an audience." Indeed, several ranch hands had paused in their work, watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. Ezra nodded curtly and gestured toward the door. "The doctor is right. Come inside." Once seated in Ezra's sparse but comfortable living room, the tension grew even more palpable. Elena remained standing near the fireplace, deliberately positioning herself closer to Ezra than to the others, a choice not lost on anyone present. "Mr. Blackwood," Sheriff Miller began, "I need to know the truth about what happened in Colorado, the full truth." Ezra's gaze was steady. "I've never denied killing those men. The first was self-defense, witnessed and judged legal. The others—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The law might call it murder. I call it justice." "Justice is not for individuals to decide," Mrs. Patterson interjected. "That's why we have courts and lawmen." "And when the courts fail," Ezra countered, his voice unnervingly calm, "when the men who murdered your father laugh because they have friends in the marshal's office, when witnesses are threatened into silence." Sheriff Miller leaned forward. "Are you saying Marshal Tate was corrupt?" "I'm saying the Harmon brothers owned half of Pueblo. Their father was a founding citizen. My family were newcomers, outsiders." Ezra's hands rested on his knees, knuckles white with tension. The marshal investigated my father's murder for 2 weeks, then declared insufficient evidence, despite 3 witnesses who saw Jack Harmon leaving our property with a smoking rifle. Elena felt a chill at the matter-of-fact way he described such injustice. What happened to those witnesses? One was found beaten nearly to death. The other 2 suddenly couldn't remember what they'd seen. Ezra's eyes found hers. That's how justice worked in Pueblo. Santiago cleared his throat. So you took matters into your own hands. I confronted Jack Harmon. He drew on me. I was faster. His brothers came for me that night, ambushed me on the road home. I killed one, the other escaped. Ezra's voice remained steady, though Elena could see the cost of this recounting in the rigid set of his shoulders. After that, yes. I hunted the last one down, found him and his cousin in a saloon. I gave them the chance my father never got. I looked them in the eye when I called them out. Were they armed? Sheriff Miller asked. Not when I entered. They had time to reach for their guns. The cousin did. Thomas Harmon just sat there, smiling like he knew I wouldn't shoot an unarmed man. Something dark crossed Ezra's face. He was wrong. The room fell silent. Elena found herself studying Ezra's profile, searching for signs of the cold-blooded killer Mrs. Patterson described. Instead, she saw only pain and the weight of terrible choices made by a grieving young man. What happened after? She asked softly. Marshal Tate arrested me. Trial was set. Then witnesses came forward, people the Harmons had terrorized for years. The bartender testified that Thomas had been reaching for a hidden derringer. The judge ruled justifiable homicide for all 3 deaths. Ezra's laugh held no humor. The law recognized what had happened as justice, but I couldn't stay there. Everywhere I looked, I saw their faces. So I left. Sheriff Miller sighed heavily. Why didn't you tell me this when you arrived in Redemption Creek? Would it have mattered? My past is my own, Sheriff. I've broken no laws here. It matters when you begin courting a respectable young woman, Mrs. Patterson insisted, turning to Elena. My dear, surely you see now the danger of associating with such a man. Elena felt all eyes turned to her, her father's concerned, the sheriff's assessing, the widow's triumphant, and Ezra's. Ezra's held a resignation that broke her heart, as if he already expected her rejection. What I see, she said carefully, is a man who faced unconscionable loss and a corrupt system that offered no justice. I see someone who made terrible choices under terrible circumstances. She moved to stand beside Ezra's chair, her hand coming to rest lightly on his shoulder. I don't condone killing, but neither do I condemn a 16-year-old boy for seeking justice when all proper channels failed him. The widow's face flushed with indignation. You cannot be serious. He's admitted to murder. He's admitted to his past, Elena corrected. A past he has clearly spent years attempting to leave behind. Santiago studied his daughter's face, then Ezra's. Mr. Blackwood, may I ask what your intentions are toward my daughter? The directness of the question seemed to surprise Ezra. He glanced up at Elena, a silent communication passing between them before he answered. Honorable ones, sir, though I've been reluctant to acknowledge them even to myself. He rose slowly, facing Santiago with dignity, despite the tension vibrating through him. I care for your daughter, more than I thought possible, but I've been hesitant to pursue those feelings because of the very past we're discussing. Elena deserves better than a man with blood on his hands. Perhaps, Santiago replied thoughtfully, you should allow Elena to decide what she deserves. Sheriff Miller cleared his throat. This is all very touching, but there's still the matter of the marshal's letter. What matter? Santiago asked. By Mr. Blackwood's account, and apparently by legal ruling, the killings were justified. The letter represents one man's opinion, nothing more. One man who happens to be a federal marshal, Mrs. Patterson insisted. A marshal who failed to properly investigate a murder, Elena countered. Hardly an unbiased source. Miller rubbed his chin thoughtfully. The letter doesn't change any legal facts. If the court ruled justifiable homicide, that's the end of it as far as the law is concerned. He fixed Ezra with a stern look. But I don't appreciate learning about this from Mrs. Patterson rather than from you directly. I came here for a fresh start, Ezra said simply, not to revisit old wounds. Well, your fresh start now includes properly courting Dr. Morales' daughter, it seems. The sheriff stood, placing his hat back on his head. I consider this matter closed unless new information comes to light. You can't be serious, Mrs. Patterson exclaimed. After everything we've heard. We've heard about a tragedy from years ago, legally resolved, that has no bearing on Mr. Blackwood's standing in this community. Miller's tone left no room for argument. I suggest we all return to town and leave these two to discuss their own affairs privately. The widow rose, her face tight with thwarted vengeance. This isn't over, Mr. Blackwood. Decent people won't stand for a killer in their midst, especially one pursuing innocent young women. Mrs. Patterson, Santiago said mildly, I believe the sheriff has made his position clear, and as Elena's father, I can assure you she is quite capable of making her own decisions regarding suitable companions. After the visitors departed, Mrs. Patterson in frosty silence, Sheriff Miller with a warning look that suggested further discussion would follow, and Santiago with a quiet word of support for his daughter, Elena and Ezra found themselves alone again. You should have gone with them, Ezra said, staring out the window as the riders disappeared down the muddy track. Your reputation is less important to me than the truth, Elena finished, moving to stand beside him. And the truth is, I'm not afraid of your past, Ezra. He turned to face her, searching her eyes for any hint of doubt or fear. You should be. Men who've killed once find it easier to do so again. Is that what you believe? Elena asked quietly, that you're forever defined by your worst moments? Aren't we all? She reached for his hand, her touch gentle but insistent. No. We're defined by our choices, all of them, not just the darkest ones. Ezra's fingers tightened around hers. Elena, I need you to understand what happened in Colorado. Not just the facts, but what it did to me. He guided her to the sofa, sitting beside her with their hands still joined. After I killed those men, something inside me changed, hardened. I came here hoping distance would heal it, but instead I've just been existing, not living. Until recently, she suggested softly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Until you appeared at the creek that morning. What changed? Everything. The words seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him. You looked at me and saw a person, not a legend or a mystery or a potential husband, just me. Do you know how rare that is? Elena thought of Thomas, her former fiancé in Santa Fe, who had seen her as a suitable match, educated, from a good family, accomplished enough to be interesting but not so ambitious as to be troublesome. He had never truly seen her at all. I think I do, she said. Ezra rose, moving to the window again, a man accustomed to watching horizons rather than meeting eyes. I can't offer you what you deserve, Elena. My past will always shadow us. People like Mrs. Patterson will never let it rest. Let me worry about what I deserve. She joined him at the window. And as for Mrs. Patterson, her influence is already waning. Once people understand she acted from jealousy rather than moral outrage, her crusade will lose its power. And your father? He seemed supportive today, but once he's had time to consider everything, my father respects my judgment, and he's a good judge of character himself. Elena placed her hand on Ezra's arm. "He wouldn't have left me here if he thought you were dangerous." For a long moment, Ezra was silent, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice held a vulnerability she had never heard before. "I've spent 3 years alone, convincing myself it was better that way. Safer." He turned to face her fully. "But these past weeks with you, I'm remembering what it feels like to want something more." "What do you want, Ezra?" The question hung between them, simple yet profound. Elena held her breath, knowing his answer would change everything, regardless of what words he chose. "A future," he said finally, "one that includes you if you'll have me." The admission, so plainly stated, brought tears to Elena's eyes. This was Ezra's way. No flowery declarations or grand gestures, just honest truth offered without embellishment. "Is that a proposal, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, a smile warming her voice. "It's a beginning," he replied, reaching up to brush a tear from her cheek. "Proper proposals come after proper courtship, or so I'm told." "And you intend to court me properly? With your father's blessing and the sheriff's grudging approval?" His fingers lingered against her skin. "Though I suspect Mrs. Patterson will continue to object." "Let her," Elena said with newfound certainty. "Some people will always disapprove. What matters is that we know the truth of who we are." Ezra's hand moved to cradle her face, his touch reverent. "And who are we, Elena Morales? Two people who recognize something in each other, something worth fighting for." She leaned into his touch. "The rest we'll discover together." This time, when they kissed, there was no hesitation, no holding back. It was a promise, a declaration, a beginning. 3 months later, as autumn painted the prairie in gold and russet, Elena stood in the town church beside her father, waiting for the wedding march to begin. Through the open door, she could see the gathered townspeople, her mother in the front pew dabbing at tears, Sheriff Miller looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. Even Mrs. Patterson seated in the back with a pinched expression that suggested she had come more out of curiosity than goodwill. "Nervous?" Santiago asked, patting her hand where it rested on his arm. "Oddly, no," she replied truthfully. "It feels right." The past months had not been without challenges. The story of Ezra's past had spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire, reactions ranging from morbid fascination to genuine concern. Some families had initially kept their distance, uncertain what to make of the quiet rancher's violent history. But time and consistent character had gradually won over most skeptics. Ezra's actions during the flood, organizing rescue parties for stranded families, opening his ranch to those who had lost homes, donating cattle to feed the displaced, spoke louder than decades-old rumors. His visible devotion to Elena, expressed not in grand gestures, but in daily acts of care and respect, further softened public opinion. Even her mother, initially cautious about her daughter marrying a man with such a past, had come to appreciate Ezra's steady nature and quiet intelligence. The day he had presented Elena with a handcrafted bookshelf for her medical texts, having noticed how she struggled to organize her studies, Isabella had declared him a man who pays attention, her highest form of praise. The music began, drawing Elena back to the present moment. As she stepped into the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes found Ezra waiting at the altar. He stood tall and solemn in a new black suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion, his eyes never leaving her face as she approached. In that moment, Elena remembered their first encounter, how he had frozen atop his horse when he saw her, something in his carefully constructed isolation cracking at the sight of a woman who would come to challenge everything he thought he knew about himself. She remembered their mornings by the creek, the gradual building of trust, the way he had slowly revealed himself to her. Not just the darkness of his past, but the depth of his character, his fierce loyalty, his capacity for tenderness, despite the hardness life had forced upon him. As she reached his side and her father placed her hand in Ezra's, she felt the slight tremor in his fingers, the only outward sign of emotion from a man who had learned to contain himself too well. But his eyes told another story, one of wonder and gratitude, and a love he was only now learning to express. "You're beautiful," he whispered, words meant for her alone. "You're here," she whispered back, knowing he would understand all she meant by those simple words. His presence not just at the altar, but in the world, in life, in the act of reaching toward happiness despite believing himself unworthy of it. Reverend Matthews began the ceremony, his voice carrying through the small church as he spoke of commitment and faith and the courage it takes to build a life together. But Elena barely heard him, too focused on the man beside her whose journey had been so long and lonely before their paths crossed. Later, as they exchanged vows and rings, Ezra's voice remained steady and clear, a man who never spoke unless he meant every word. And when he finally kissed her as husband and wife, Elena felt the last of his barriers dissolve, replaced by the certainty that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Outside the church, autumn sunlight spilled across the town square, touching everything with golden promise. The same light that had illuminated their first meeting now blessed their union, turning Ezra's dark hair to midnight touched with silver and warming Elena's cream-colored wedding gown to the color of sunrise. And if anyone noticed how the town's most solitary man could not take his eyes off his bride, how his usual stoic expression had given way to something approaching joy, they were wise enough to recognize the power of transformation, of healing, of love that arrives unexpectedly and changes everything in its path.